So as not to waste too much time, hoping the PowerPoint will be available, just in case it doesn't, I'm going to have to rely totally on the sheets I have given you, which I did not want to do, and still hoping that I won't have to do it. But let me at least tell you a few introductory things anyway. First of all, it's very good for you to know that it's university policy that mobiles and IT items are not meant to be present either with you, certainly not with you in a common lecture like this, because they distract students around you, but primarily it's an insult really to whoever is the lecturer. Now, I don't get insulted easy, but we sometimes invite people, from outside of the university to come and lecture. And when they look out there and they see people playing around with their mobiles and talking to each other, it gives a very bad impression of the AUB. And I'm sure, you're not just here to get a degree, but you also want that degree to have a good reputation. And believe me, this sort of thing, when it's continuous, starts to give, does not help the university in its attempt to present itself as a really, first-rate university globally, and not just for the Middle East. So please, put away your mobiles. They'll survive for 50 minutes without, interaction with you, and give me your full attention. I told you we were being technologically challenged, not just with the laptop not being able to project onto the screen, but now also we are in Plato's cave, and soon, hopefully, we will be turned around forcefully, dragged up, and then learn that the light is better than darkness after all, and this is what we're trying to do with you, of course, in the humanities especially. The more light you shed on your own humanity, the happier you will be, because you will indeed be coming out of the cave of ignorance and darkness. At least please bring the lights back. Okay, the fly sheets you have are rather comprehensive. They are not intended to be all the items on it to be covered in this one brief period of time that I have. My main purpose in this lecture, and the mandate for this particular lecture, is to help you sufficiently to bridge the gap, especially since most of you probably have not had 201, but to bridge the gap between the world of 201, which is the world of the Greeks and the Romans primarily, three other great civilizations, with Gilgamesh, the Mesopotamian variety of cultures, with, of course, the Greek primarily taking most of the CVSP 201 course, and the Romans, who were simply, culturally, very, very much just simply a continuation of the Greek in a Roman and a Latin way. So two main things I have to do in one lecture is first try to help you bridge that gap. Last week, the lecturer tried to bridge the gap that you've never been exposed to the philosophers themselves, which affected very much the monotheistic thinkers. But this is a semester primarily focused on thinkers in monotheistic societies. So the very first page I will go over fairly quickly. I wish I'd had more time. This is a very interesting topic, and I'd like to be able to speak about it more fully. It's there just in case some of your teachers would like to make use of it. And then I'll go on from there. But for the first page, primarily, if what you have there, thinkers in monotheistic societies. So this is not a course in religion. It's primarily how did these religious societies, what did they produce in the way of thought, in the way of art, in the way of all the wonderful things that we as human beings in a global world still benefit from. And particularly in the humanities and in CVSP, what did they think about four main topics: the divine, the cosmos, nature, the universe around us, man, or the human being, the human race, the human being, and society. These four main categories, in one way or another, play into what we do in CVSP practically all through the course. That was how it was initially conceived. CBSB is changing, and it'll be moving on into more and more different formats in the future, but for right now, it still is primarily the basis of what we do in CVSP. We try to understand and read so that we can let the people speak for themselves. That's why we insist on your texts and your primary texts. We don't want you to just take notes. We don't just want you to go to secondary sources. And we don't want you to just believe everything a lecturer or a teacher tells you, but we want you to listen attentively, because if you don't listen, you'll never understand. And if you don't understand, you won't be able to make a judgment of if you agree or you disagree. And this is going to be one of the main things Augustine focuses on, that understanding comes only after experience as well as reason and experience, and reason and experience in the best possible way means you really want to get to understand how a particular culture, their best thinkers, their best representatives, how they presented what it means to be a human being, and therefore human beings then and today always ask the big question, the divine. So some have answered the divine question in terms of one God, and that's what we're focusing on in 202. Monotheisms, Abrahamic monotheisms, that came to believe that there's only one divine being, and that anything divine is connected only with this one being. Whereas the cultures, many cultures of the world even today, but many cultures of the ancient period, and the medieval period even were polytheistic, meaning they believed that the divine constituted many, many powerful and immortal beings. And that was the primary function, the primary quality of the gods, that primarily they were immortal. And then some of them did good things and some of them did bad things. And Homer says in the Odyssey, Zeus, for them the most important of the gods. There's no one God, but of all the gods, he's the most important. Homer says the gods give more evil, or Zeus gives more evil than good. And so it's not until you come to the philosophers in those cultures, the philosophers then shift this focus of the society onto understanding the divine as polytheistic and simply basically powerful and immortal and affect us. And many, but certainly not necessarily good, and good in the monotheistic meaning always means good for the human. It doesn't just good versus bad, but good for the human. None of them understood the divine in this particular special way that came to be the understanding of God in all of monotheism. In philosophy, also, Plato, as you've seen hopefully already, comes to the notion that the most important thing you need to have a relationship with, because for Plato it wasn't just abstract knowledge, it was the good, the form of the good. So goodness is the main quality of whatever is divine. For Plato there were still many divine, many eternal beings, but he had transformed them all into philosophical and rational symbols. Athene became wisdom, and Zeus became justice, or represented justice, and Aphrodite represents beauty. And for, of course, Plato, he thought any view of the divine where they are evil is simply false and wrong, and people have been misled in their societies. And Plato, in his great work, The Republic, actually says, we don't want any poets in our ideal community. If we're thinking rationally, how can we have a really excellent community? Because that's what the Republic was, not some kind of utopia, really, but more sort of what can reason bring us to conclude and understand about what a human society ought to be like. And so in such a society, he wants to kick out all these people who've been leading people to think that the gods are somehow evil and that you have to be worried about a curse. And like the Oedipus curse, he had to kill his father and marry his mother no matter what he did, and that life could be like that. And the Plato and Socrates and Plato and the philosophers well before them, but Socrates marks the sort of icon of Greek philosophy, because he influenced really everything that comes after him through Plato. But basically, that goodness was at the heart of everything. And so when you come now to the monotheistic thinkers, and now we're into the Roman Empire and the Christian form of monotheism, what's happening now is a coming together, as the lecturer last week started to tell you, a coming together of two great cultures, two great ways of understanding our humanity. And at the level of the divinity, there was a lot of intersection between, Plato and, especially Plato and monotheistic thinking at that time when Christianity started to become influential. And so this semester now really is about how the Hebrew, the Christian, and the Muslim societies, cultures produced great thinkers, as well as great art and great everything else they produced, but they produced great people who were able to represent to us in the 21st century and throughout basically how these people understood the divine. And so divinity now becomes the one God, and more they start to try to use reason as well as revelation to understand better how can a rational human being understand the divine alongside of revelation. And for most of the important thinkers, really, there were extremes on all sides always, but the ones that sort of really have survived into today are those who found that there was no essential contradiction between what reason has produced in Greek philosophy and what revelation has been presented to the monotheistic societies, as long as you are using reason on revelation. And so when you read Revelation, you need to be using your reason as well. And therefore you'll find that you have to read scriptures not as you would read a magazine today or a novel today or a book today or anything like that. You have to read each part of the scriptures that begin with Moses. And for centuries into then when you come to the Christian scriptures, you have to read them in context. And this is the best way to move into monotheistic thinking, is to start with seeing how the Hebrew scriptures were in interaction with the cultures of the day, with the Mesopotamian, with the Egyptian, with the Greek, right? The Hebrews had already been, and so you can't read Genesis from an evolution point of view today, because it was not meant to be a biology book, right? It was not meant to teach you biology or astrophysics. It was, when you study them together, it was a direct dialogue, true or false. That's not our point, but comparative thing, true or false. But they were saying that no, these other ways of understanding the divine and gods and human beings and what human life is all about and how you should live with each other and what is good and what is bad. No, we want to give this opinion about them. They presented it as God's word. All right? But God's word has to be understood through reason, because that's all humans have finally, through reason and experience. That's what Augustine is going to insist on. That reason on its own will not give you real understanding of something that's human, and that involves relationships, involves history, and involves a deeper understanding of what monotheism is presenting. You have to see what's the message coming through the monotheistic text at a particular time when it was arguing with or presenting a different view to what was prevalent amongst other societies. When you start using reason, people have always been doing that, but when you start using reason more and more in this way, you come to, as a monotheist, you come to a much, much different understanding of your monotheism than if you just look at it sort of straightforwardly from the time of Moses to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and you just read them just sort of at face value. Okay? We will see how different thinkers in this semester will address this issue. How should a man of reason, how should a human being who finds reason very important and is using reason or wouldn't even be in this kind of discussion in the first place, how can they best use reason on revelation to get the best of both? So you will see Augustine's going to be trying to do this. The first one you're reading now is going to be trying to see how he, as a Greek and Roman thinker, for much of his life, rejecting monotheism because he was reading the Bible in a superficial way and had thought the Bible was, nothing to compare with the great works of the Greeks. At one point, he starts to meet some thinkers in the Christian world, and they start to help him understand what the scriptures were all about. And the more he did that, the more he became convinced of monotheism. But he had such a full experience of Greek and Roman philosophy and thought that his work is an extremely valuable output at that time, and it continues to influence people today in many ways beyond just religion, even beyond theology. But the things that he came up with is what I'm going to try to present to you today. What are some things that Augustine does in trying to bring together, trying to make the best use of two great ways of understanding human life? The one that comes from the Greek philosophers primarily, rejecting the Greek tragedians, like Plato. He thought that was all sentimentality, and that was one of the great problems, that the whole tragic way of understanding life is sort of self-pity and thinking of yourself, and gloominess, and there's no real horizon, and so you give yourself a kind of a pat on the back and say, but you can be great as a human, don't worry. But Plato had rejected all this, and there is a divine for Plato and monism. Okay, the divine is primarily goodness and wisdom and beauty and all of this sort of thing, but especially goodness for Plato. This was the ultimate thing that he refused to define. Okay, he can give a definition of wisdom, of courage, of the other four great virtues: wisdom, courage, self-control, justice. You can give definitions of these through reason. But for Plato already, he said, just the definition is not enough. You need to start experience what these definitions are referring to. He called it participation. The human reason participates in these divine realities, all right, which he called forms, which were rationalization of the Greek religious and tragic view of the gods. And goodness, therefore, was the most important thing, so he refused to define goodness. Goodness is in every single thing for Plato. If there's no goodness in something, it couldn't exist. And so for him, goodness becomes beyond definition. All right? Hopefully you've been introduced to some of this kind of thinking. Plotinus is a Roman many centuries later. That's a Roman. But the Greek, already Plato had set the tone for when there was an interaction of finding common ground between Greek philosophy and monotheistic thought, all right? In a sense, there's one indefinable thing, goodness, which is experienced in everything, and therefore without it nothing could go on existing. Here now we start to have, we've had the belief in one God, but now as it's being philosophized, not just as a religious and theological view, but now when it starts to being philosophized more and more, it had already been done in the Hebrew world, but now with the Roman Empire, that's where we are now. All this is on the web, and I really won't have time to go through it. You might find it interesting, what CBSP, what we're trying to do in all of CBSP, the objectives of this one, the transition from the world of Homer to the world of Abraham. And that, by the way, is one of the titles there. So, first of all, I have there thinkers in monotheistic societies, and the interaction in CBSP 202 between three main understandings of human life. The Abrahamic, and that's the word that's often used for Hebrew, Christian, and Islamic. They're all three of these are Abrahamic monotheisms, as opposed to other possible monotheisms. The Greco-Roman, and I call that the Homeric, because Homer was the one who launched all of thinking in the Greek and Roman world. Without Homer, you cannot really understand how philosophy, how theater, how drama, how literature, how legal thinking, how historical writing. It all is in one way or another standing on the shoulders of the giant Homer, who had first set the tone for how thinkers should look at the world and the universe and the cosmos. So Abrahamic and Homeric are interacting now with each other. And mysticism, which of course we ordinarily associate primarily with the Far East and other cultures of the world, but now we will see how mysticism interacts with the world of monotheism. First of all, in Augustine, you'll see how he was trying to practice rational mysticism. This is Plotinus, the man you were introduced to last time. From them, you go through reason, like Plato and like Aristotle, as far as reason will take you, but eventually reason will lead you to leap into a mystical experience, a oneness, a yoga, a Zen, because those are the words that mean unity, union. And this we will see primarily how it works in Augustine, and then we'll see how it works in Sufism in Islam, specifically in this particular semester. So during this semester, you will be exposed to three great ways that endure into today's world of understanding what's the real meaning of human life. What gives it taste? What gives it meaning? How can we improve it? How can, what is it that holds back improvement? The things we're always interested in one way or another. No matter how much we develop in terms of technology and information, wisdom is still something that is always remains there in some way or another. Wisdom, in a sense, is in the Platonic sense eternal. That it's something always there, and it's sort of appropriated in different packages throughout time, and no one person, no one culture will ever get it all at once, and therefore this is a justification of making sure you get all the wisdom that you can get from all of the previous cultures and the cultures of today. The more you get of that, the more you'll be participating and sort of appropriating, and I prefer to use the word existentially, and I'll tell you how I use the word, that there's existential knowledge, existential wisdom, not just rationalistic wisdom and rationalistic knowledge. There's something called existential wisdom, which is at the basis of Augustine, of Pascal, of people before you get to the existentialists of the 20th century, some of whom were atheists and some of them were believers. So an existential approach to understanding the knowledge you have and the wisdom you have and how to get it is an important part of this particular lecture, because we rarely speak about it in our CVSP. But it's very good for you to at least be introduced to it, and a very good person to introduce you through it is Augustine, because he was doing both things. He was doing the rationalistic thing, but then he was also doing the more monotheistic existential approach to wisdom, meaning you get wisdom through living, through interacting, through relating to other human beings. You love, you'll understand love the more you are loved and beloved by another human being. You won't just understand love as something that you're going to define or talk about or think you know about it. So when in the Christian scriptures it says God is love, one of the only definitions given of God, God is love, you'll start to have a better understanding of what does love mean in a monotheistic world. It does not primarily mean attraction. Love means sharing, giving, concerning, being so concerned for someone else you're ready to sacrifice. Parole, parole, in one of the songs, in the Italian. Words, I love you, show me. So the actual demonstration of love is when we interact with each other in a loving way, in concern, and love your neighbor the same way you love yourself means exactly, you know how you treat yourself. You take care of yourself. You make excuses for yourself. You do all these wonderful things. Well, do this to your neighbor, to any other human, the same way you do it to yourself. You're most likely to experience divine love there. You can experience divine love through prayer and monotheism, of course, and through other ways, and certain types of what is called mysticism, but it's not the same thing as real mysticism. You can get very close to this monotheistic God, but your primary way of experiencing God, of getting existential knowledge of God, is in your relationship in community. If there's no community, then you don't know what monotheism is. It's only when there is a community that monotheism is truly being lived out and presented. So you won't find in the scriptures, in the ones that influence Augustine, now he comes before Islam, what is called the Christian Bible, which combines the Hebrew Bible with the Christian scriptures. There, the main focus there is on the knowledge of God, and the knowledge of God is always compared to how do a husband and a wife know one another so fully, not just sexually, but they're supposed to be, because from Genesis it says husband and wife are two parts of the one humanity, that male and female make the human being, not just Adam. Adam on his own couldn't make it until he gets Eve. So Adam and Eve make the human being. This is why in monotheism, one of the reasons why family is so important. And in the modern period now, you're having lots of problems because families cannot show what they're supposed to mean from when you get in Genesis. You're supposed to have such a union of a male and a female that God will be revealed to the baby through this union. That's the first experience, supposedly, in monotheism of this God. Not just to read about them or be taught about them or inherit it, but you're experiencing the love of two parents who love one another, with all the difficulties there are there, but they stick together and they sacrifice and they do all this. You start to understand what does it mean that God is love. That in some way you cannot understand fully, but you can appreciate it and say, well, that's wonderful if God is like that. That's how God treats the human race. God sacrifices for the human race. God, and in the forgiveness, patience, continuing to send prophets. For here, sending Christ. This is all a form of giving and sharing and sacrificing, because a powerful person doesn't do that sort of thing. A powerful person thinks of themselves and certainly would never sacrifice for the sake of something much lower than itself, a human being. So love has this kind of social and communal and interactional meaning, and so the knowledge of God is primarily through when you are experiencing it in the love of neighbor. That's why when Jesus speaks about the two main commandments, love God always in the first place, in every way, but love your neighbor the same way you love yourself. And that's the whole, he says, of the law, the Sharia, the prophets. That's the basic meaning of all that you're going to read there. So when you read all of these things, you have to refer them to something that is more basic than just what you're reading at the time or the specific thing. They're supposedly, in one way or another, trying to communicate this truth, that when people don't love one another as they love each other, you get the mess the world is in, and that the only way out of it is when people actually do practice these basic commandments, loving God always first and putting God always first. And philosophically, and of course loving your neighbor the same way you love. So the more you try to do that, the more society, the more history flourishes. The less you do it, the more you fall. And so the first Genesis tells you humans have fallen away from an initial state in paradise. Right? All these are symbols of that. When first created by God, they were in a, they never needed to taste of evil. Existential knowledge is taste, and dhawq in mysticism. You have to taste it. They didn't need to taste evil. There was no need to taste evil. But once you've tasted evil, the human race now has a new experience. Part of it is humanity, and this is pictured symbolically as a fall. And then there are all kinds of interpretations of what that does to the human. But it's very clear that somehow the human race is not doing what it's supposed to do. And that's one of the major reasons why we have just war after war and misery after misery, and that we have good things because some people do follow these things. Coming back to the philosophical issue, this is the existential aspect of knowledge through experience and social interaction and understanding things in context, and that kind of higher form of using reason than just mathematically or scientifically. But Plato's good in Plotinus becomes the one, and you had this last week, and I'm going to flash through to that now. I would have liked to have, if I had 2 lectures, I could do all this much more in an interesting way, but I have to, since I have to do everything in one lecture, I have to be very specific. Last time, Plotinus, who considered himself a Platonist, but he started a school that came to be called Neoplatonism, because indeed, he goes beyond just what Plato is, but he builds on Plato. Plato had mentioned the one, and Plato had presented the good as the most important factor in human life, and for reason to be able to understand and get close to in their own lives. And even in Plato, the good was in one way or another beyond. Okay, now the one becomes fully beyond in this system. And in monotheism, of course, you have Allahu Akbar. Has anybody ever heard that word? All right? Allahu Akbar. Now, what does that mean philosophically and theologically? Not how you might be hearing it sometimes when it has nothing to do with with Islam as such. But this is a continuation, because Islam sees itself simply as a continuation of the Hebrew and the Christian. And the Muslim, Islam tells you it's not a new religion. They're coming to confirm what's come before and to set right what has been misunderstood before. That's how the Quran presents itself. So we'll be wanting to see each work, each culture, how it understands itself. Put aside the views you have and keep them, that's no problem. But as a scholar, as a person in the humanities, wanting to understand all other cultures, the first step is to first listen. Let the people speak for themselves. Read the best of what they have produced, not the worst. You can always look at the worst and do that. There's always going to be good and evil in the world, no matter where anymore. This in the Christian view, and Augustine sets it in a certain way. We are in a fallen world where we have tasted evil, and so evil has now become a part of the human community, and it develops and it grows and has worse and worse consequences. And the message is, of course, that you as a human being are right now either contributing to the progress of the human race or the other, depending on how you yourself are taking responsibility to do the right thing as far as you can, or you're letting yourself just go flow with the herd in the latest fashion and what's easy and comfortable. The more you'll see this basic notion, you'll have seen it in the Greek world, had you read it, in terms of their great heroes, were always people who were always seeking something better, so the best. They weren't satisfied with just what they were having, and to get it, they had to sacrifice. So already there's this kind of love being a human thing, that wherever people really set their minds on something that they think really is worthwhile, not just for themselves, but for humanity, and they're ready to sacrifice for it, whether it's a scientist who sacrifices his reputation because he's in a certain society that doesn't want him to go on doing what he's doing because they don't understand science. They think everything, they look at it from one side, or when a scientist who's been brainwashed in this way starts to discover and understand what monotheism really is all about and starts to listen and to its best proponents, you get prejudice and extremism is in every human being, and it comes into everything. So don't think you'll ever find one ism that as practiced by humans that you're not going to find the good and the evil. The message is the human is doing this. The monotheistic message is you are responsible because God is only going to be doing what's good. He's good. Whatever happens, and you may not understand it, it's still in one way or another for the good of the human race. Right? Whereas if you are doing, as far as you're doing that, you are being God-like. You are being in the image and likeness of God in the first way it's presented. You are being Khalifatullah on this ground, the representative of God in Islam, the one who is to take care of the creation. In both cases, that's one of the basic meanings. But in both cases, it means that in this view of the human being, and it's not pervasive through all cultures, but the human being is the focus. So it doesn't matter whether the earth is the center of this, geographically, or the sun, or what rotates about what. That's a question for science. That's a question for humans to discover and develop, and science keeps developing. The point there is that that it was always understood the human was at the center of God's concern. And so when they started to say the sun is not revolving about the earth is revolving about the sun, that had nothing to do with the message of that the human race is at the center. It doesn't have to be geographically at the center. It's the center of the human's concern. Unlike in most of the polytheistic religions, that's not true. Each god has certain favorites, but there's no one god that's concerned for every single human being. So just to be a human is already to have infinite value in monotheism, because you're connected directly to God. In the Hebrew scriptures, one of the main things the prophet keeps accusing first of all, Israel is accused of not presenting proof for the existence of God. See, existential proof. If Israel had done what it was supposed to do, it would have shown to all the other people of the world how much their way of life, based on what God has taught them, is so much better than something else. So time after time, a prophet will come and say, you're giving God a bad name, you're preventing people from knowing God, so humans are always in the way. It's not just Israel, the same thing becomes true of any monotheistic society. A monotheistic society, if they understand their monotheism, they're supposed to live in such a way that the divine is exhibited, demonstrated, not just a proof for the existence of God, and then you play ping pong throughout the centuries. Proof for the existence of God? No, a proof that shows that proof doesn't work. And then a proof that shows that proof isn't really understanding. And then I call it ping pong. If you just go for God as sort of a subject of can you prove its existence or not, you'll see in this course that there is a place for rational proofs for the existence of God. But that's not the point of monotheism. This is one of the things that differs that the monotheistic society of Augustine and the Greek and Roman society of Augustine, a major difference in their understanding of reason and knowledge and truth. That you get knowledge through reason, absolutely, and Augustine was very much involved with that. But he'd start to see that there's another channel of human knowledge, knowledge that is not going to be just simply scientific or technological, and therefore by definition always changing and always improving. There's going to be certain things that you will discover as a human being that when you really can write about it and express it and live it, someone in a much later century can read it, and if they understand what's going on, they'll see that wisdom is eternal. That's what Augustine, basically Augustine's whole work is an attempt to do this. He wrote around 1,000 works, 2 main books, great books, called the Confessions, the first real autobiography, because autobiographies tended to be you write about yourself in the best possible way. When you read the Confessions, he is now, from his own point of view, as honestly as he knows how to, simply going over his life now as a monotheist, after having lived 11 years as a monotheist and have become even one of the leaders in the community there, and certainly one of their top thinkers. 11 years after his experience, existential knowledge, and combining it with his Greek knowledge, he writes the Confessions. So that's one way of reading the Confessions, understanding that's what he's trying to do there. So with Plotinus, for instance, as an excellent example, what he's trying to do is he was exposed to all the other great philosophies of the day: Stoicism, Epicureanism, even the basic philosophies of the time. The main sort of powerful movement, which was claiming to be Christian, was Manichaeism, really coming from the Far East, but coming into the area of the Roman Empire and claiming to be the true Christianity. And some scholars have gone so far as to say that Manichaeism had become so powerful by the time of Augustine that it was Augustine who in the West put a stop to that and exposed how Manichaeism, Manichaeism is Manichaeism, but it's not Christianity. Number one, they believe basically in 2 final ultimate forces, one good and one evil, which immediately puts them outside of the monotheistic phase. But also they had this very secretive system, Gnosticism. Basically only the elect really know what's going on. And one of the things that happens with him, at one point he meets one of the supposedly great people in this work, and he finds that at the level of reasoning and thinking, the guy is sub what he would have expected as somebody who's supposed to be that. That was one of his main problems. The other main problem was it taught that sex was one of the main sources of evil. And of course, in the monotheistic world, God has created sex. And if God has created sex, sex as such is good. It's how you misuse good things that become evil in monotheism. How you abuse sex, how you misuse sex. That's where evil comes in. But sex as such is an extremely important part of human life throughout the scriptures. They taught that sex, and the body and matter, this is where evil came from. By now, Augustine was fully convinced that these things did not fully explain rationally his own life, and he felt that the will was what we had to focus on. The Greeks had talked about reason greatly and wonderfully, and he was learning so much from them. They had spoken about the will, but they had never focused on the will as almost an autonomous power in the human being. And that for him, finally, the will is what really makes us either a good human being or an evil human being. We may be very intelligent, but we may be very evil, something that the Greek and Roman thought could not be possible. When you do evil, it's because you're ignorant. Right? Now, in the monotheistic world, if you read the whole scripture, it's obvious there that it's not just a question of how much knowledge you have. And of course, in the Christian understanding of the devil, Satan is the most intelligent being God has ever created. And that's why he can fool and seduce and play around with the human race, because he is so intelligent. So as symbolism, in Augustine's world, it became very clear to him that the source of evil was the will. All right? The angelic will, when Lucifer rebels against God and becomes Satan, because Lucifer supposedly is the original greatest angel God had ever created, and then he rebels against God and he becomes Satan, meaning the enemy, the adversary. All right? So the free will of the angelic free will was used in a negative way. And then the human being is created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore has reason and free will, and at the human level. God is always greater, so you can never really fully understand how God is rational, or how God uses his will, or how God uses these things. But you get a taste of it as a human, because you are created in the image and likeness. So he said the will, that's what we need to now explore philosophically. The will, it has never been really fully explored. So one of the great contributions he gives to philosophy generally, outside of religion or monotheistic societies, is now encouraging philosophers to not just focus on the powers of the will, and to just be looking at ignorance and knowledge, the cave and coming out of the cave, but rather that aspect in Plato's cave, actually, which sometimes is missed. Why does the prisoner have to be forced to turn around to the light? Why does he have to be dragged up? What's this resistance in the normal human being? Because the cave represents the prisoners of the normal human being. Right? So in Plato already you had this kind of understanding that there's something has gone wrong. A virus has hit your hard disk. Something has hit the human race in such a way, and not where the Greeks were trying to look at it in terms of reason. That has been hit, and so reason no longer functions as well as supposed to, supposedly. But the main thing is the will has been hit. Willfully, Adam and Eve, whatever they represent, humanity, had rebelled willingly and freely, because in Genesis it says God was walking with them, meaning with them all the time, and they were experiencing him existentially all the time. And then first real temptation they get to doubt God, because it seems like it'll give them more power. So you start to see there the lust for power. You'll become like gods. They betray God. Sin. You see, sin is a betrayal of a person, finally, in monotheism. It's not just doing something wrong, which, of course, going against the law, of course. But sin in monotheism is always you're betraying a person. You're betraying God. You're betraying your fellow humans when you sin. So sin is not something that was really very much talked about in the Greco-Roman cultures. For there it was ignorance, it was blindness. Oedipus is blind, not wicked, for instance, in the Oedipus story. It's blindness, and somehow we're cursed as a human race with blindness in the tragic vision. Plato says, no, we're not cursed with blindness. We need to learn how to use our reason properly. We need to reset society in such a way that the education system, the institutions all help us develop reason in the proper way, and we will get away from the evil and the misery. And he says, this may never happen, what we are looking at, but if we don't try to, through reason, try to see how we can improve society, we'll never get forwards. And what he says in the Republic, finally, is if we don't do something about all that that's there, then don't complain. History is going to be just misery after misery after misery, and they mostly believe that history was simply repetitive and cyclical. So here now you have the one. Now we have Augustine, first of all, looking at all the materialistic philosophies of the day, and there were many. He gets attracted to Platonism because this is the first serious philosophy he comes into touch with that allows him to understand that there's another dimension of reality which humans experience. It's not just up in the air somewhere, right? Just like in monotheism, God isn't up in the air somewhere. If you have no concrete existential experience of what you call God, then you're following it for some other reason, but you're not having any sort of serious experience that makes monotheism still attractive to many people throughout the centuries. Plotinus, then, the one is in a sense Allahu Akbar, transcendent in some way, beyond anything we can define. And this, of course, becomes more and more the understanding philosophically of the monotheistic God. Right? They'd always been told there's only one real God, all the other gods are just nothings. You build a statue and you start worshiping it and you think it's a god. And then they say that these are just the fallen angels, the demons who are taking advantage of your being far away from the real God. And as a human, you have to worship something. So they come in some way and they start to let you believe they really exist, and you build statues to them and you present your children to them. This is the understanding of Abraham, by the way, that the Abraham story was precisely meant to say, this God does not want you to sacrifice your favorite son to him. Right? So he gets him to see this is a test of faith. Will Abraham be at least as loyal to his God as all the peoples around him are, because when you worshiped a God, one of the ways you showed it, these other gods, is that you would be ready to sacrifice your children to them. And Agamemnon cannot cross the sea and get to Troy for the Trojan War unless he slits the throat of his daughter as a sacrifice to the gods, okay? So the Abraham sacrifice story is always understood in whatever later way people would like to understand it. But if you look at it in context, it was the monotheistic way of telling the people of the time in a way they could understand that God wants to test your faith in one way or another, because faith isn't just parole, it's life. So are you ready to sacrifice for something you really value? But God is not the kind of God that you're used to understanding in your Mesopotamian environment or your Egyptian environment, wherever they were living for many years, trying to make it clear that they are to only follow this one God, and this one God is like this, what Abraham experienced. That's why the Quran will say Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian, he was a Muslim. But he didn't mean he was a Muslim on his Hawiyi or as Muslims we understand today. But he was saying, Abraham is the core of what faith and love are, both the two together, faith, loyalty, something that you've experienced good from and you're loyal to. So you can't be loyal just to an idea or an abstract religion or something. You can only be truly loyal to something you've experienced. Now, if you've experienced this good thing, all right, and he believes it's God, Abraham, well, then you should be ready to do what other people are doing for what they think is most important. So he's ready to sacrifice his son, but God prevents him from doing it. And this is a message that, in this religion, this God is not interested in your... And so the prophets come and say, because the Hebrew people continue to prefer to follow some of these other religions because they're more fun, they seem more powerful, they say, I don't know what, and they want a king when they're not supposed to have a king because everybody else has a king. We want to have a king too. So the prophet tells them, okay, but when you get a king, don't come complaining to me that he's going to start to oppress you and make use of you. You are all brothers. Your leaders should be a brother amongst you, and only God is there. Well, no, we want a king. So, they get their kings, and their kings start to treat them, as kings in those days tended to treat people. So basically, the one is not fully understandable by reason in both the Plotinus system nor the monotheistic philosophies and thought. That's one point of connection between the two. Okay, finally, the one and the monotheistic understanding of God is that in one way or another, transcendence beyond definition, beyond human, being able to put into categories. Unlike, Aristotle had 201, and it is supposed to be part of the readings. I'm not teaching 201, this 202, this semester. Aristotle had come to the conclusion that reason can define God. What is God? God is reason. God is thought. The greatest thing we ever experienced. So God must be that, thought. And what does God do all the time? Well, he must do the best thing, and that is he's reasoning all the time. And what does this God do with this reasoning? Reasons on himself, because he's the only perfect thing there is in the universe. So why would he want to bother with anything less? So the Aristotelian God was also another example of a philosophical God that was not primarily interested in the human race, but primarily focusing on himself. We get good things because we're all attracted to God. That's what love is in Plato and in Aristotle, eros. That kind of love. We're attracted to perfection. Perfection as a human. An oak tree, an acorn is attracted to become an oak tree, the perfection of the acorn. He tried to philosophically understand things along this basic way, but he thought he could define God. Plato had refused to define the one. And so God, you will find in most monotheistic thinkers and philosophies, they follow that reason should be used and can be used, and it's very important to understand even your own monotheism in a proper way, but you can never finally fully define this God in the same way you define anything else. You find that what you learn about this God is quite wonderful, so acceptable to reason, but your reason didn't discover how forgiving, how merciful for Christianity, how he sacrifices for you, everything, and all this kind of stuff. That this is stuff that reason doesn't come to on its own. This is only when God reveals himself throughout history in concrete, existential fashion, so that you can get knowledge concretely. So this first page is just an attempt to put some things on that page about all of this into action. Now, the main difference for... Also, there are some things on the second page of the thing that would be a second lecture fully, but there are some items there that are interesting, and somebody might want to pick some of these points up on there. But we come down to the context and the stuff like that. But I want to jump to more specifically here what he does to Plotinus in the book you're reading. Augustine credits the Platonists with providing him with his philosophical structure. Okay? You always follow a philosophical school. Nobody starts from zero, unusually, in philosophy. You start from some school of thought that's already there, that you have found is really the best one available at the time. So he credits the Platonists with providing his best medium, if you like, for expressing his understanding now of human life and all of that. Beyond the major philosophies of the day, Stoicism, Epicureanism, Manichaeism, he sees the major difference in the humility of God. You see, well, one doesn't often think of God as being humble, but the more you read the monotheistic scriptures, the more you come to understanding what humility means. That humility means service, humility means giving, humility means doing something for somebody less great than you, all right? That humility doesn't just mean, not boasting or not, humility is not a function of boasting. Humility is a function of action, all right? The great virtues in monotheism are always connected to the way you act, the way you behave, the way you relate to other human beings. So humility is the way God acts with us. He does not act with us to sort of just quickly eradicate us, send a flood to destroy all of humanity. If there's one human, Noah, in that story, who deserves to remain, then all humanity can be saved. No conception of a powerful being, like that had ever really been presented in that kind of a way. So the humility of God is what Augustine focuses on. He finally decides that there are two major things in your life, either to follow the path of humilitas, humility, or to follow the way of superbia, or pride. So pride and humility have a specific meaning here. Pride means to only want to serve yourself and to use everybody for your own good, and to even use God, if you believe in God, for your own good. And the opposite, humility, is to, if you have power, to use it in the best way for people who need it, not to oppress them, and to be concerned for, in our societies today, the handicapped, the marginalized, the whatever, however you translate it. So he sees that he found they did not value or practice this virtue, the Platonists, whereas he found in the monotheistic scriptures and in his Christian community and Christian life that humility meant something very, very different. For him, this virtue makes all the difference. Without it, pride spoils all things that reason can come to, because finally reason often comes to, especially in the philosophers of the day, to a kind of pride in themselves. We are the elite, the others are the awam. There are the masses who need religion, but we have philosophy, or our way of understanding religion is the only way. All right, they saw this so he saw these people, because they were very elitist in this way, as basically, there's only some people can really achieve this mystical union. Most humans have to sort of make do with whatever they have, similar to Plato, where he says there are the philosophers, the warriors, and the common people, and it's really only the philosophers who really see things fully. The others learn to make do with what they have. There are different human natures. Right? He found that in this system, every human being has infinite value. Just by being directly connected to God. No human can own another human or do that. So he monotheizes this world by making the one God. Not the one was detached, separate, not interested in anything other than itself. Whereas this God is primarily understood in terms of the concern for the human race. Intellect and psyche and body and matter, these four main things. Body and matter, the farther you move away, evil was a function of distance. The farther you're away from the source, evil comes. The will is not given, you see, a place. So Augustine takes the structure, but he says evil is not coming from matter or the body as such. It's how the human will uses or abuses sex and the body and matter and everything. So the function in the human, in the psyche, the part, the soul, the world soul, and that's where we belong as our soul. That's the secret of understanding everything about the divine, about society, about history, about your own self. To realize that you are given great reason. And that's why you can connect with the things that are above you. You're given emotions and all the other things that, that make you a human animal, all right? But you're given your will, and the will is really so much more powerful than it had ever been given credit for, that it can spoil reason and not lead to tragedy as in Thucydides, if you took 201. But rather, it can spoil things in a miserable way, but it can spoil things sort of almost totally and sort of make the human race have to go through things that it was never meant to go through. It should have stayed in paradise, in that condition. Paradise, not a place. It should have stayed in a condition where evil was never tasted. Existential knowledge. Once you taste it, there's some oil that they try to sell here. They say, and if you taste it, you're stuck with it, and that's the sort of the understanding of evil. As soon as you do evil, it actually has a nice taste to it, and so you do more of it. And when you taste goodness, of course, then you start to understand the opposite. Okay, if people are leaving, and I guess it must be their right, or I'm sure they would never do something that wasn't right. So I'm sorry I couldn't do much more than that in this one particular, but I've tried to give you some main points that your teachers will have to take you wherever they wish from here. Thank you.